Hello, BookTube. It's a beautiful blue sky Saturday here, cool in the morning, but shirt sleeve weather in the afternoon, and then cool again at night. Just absolutely lovely and peaceful as well. Although you'd never know it from the other video that I made today, which was fairly low key, but still descended into rants on a couple of different subjects. So I thought I would make a separate video. Doesn't have to be very long. About my reading week. It's the end of the reading week, and I thought I would look back on it. I love these kinds of videos when I watch all of you do them, so I thought I would do one myself. I almost never do. It was a good reading week for me, a good solid reading week. As of this morning, I got 30 books read. I'm not going to count. I think I'll just stop there, and I'll start the clock on Sunday for next week. I also finished my first full week in a new radio program for the Cedarburg Public Library Radio in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Reached out to me, and we are doing a book of the day, which is a lot of fun. And we tried it out. My producer Jeff and I tried it out a couple of times. We're still trying things out. We're not at all sure of how we're going to do things. As I mentioned to him, the one variable, the one X factor that usually does get worked out over a long time is already firmly in place by weird lucky chance, and that is the chemistry between the two people. We already have that. I don't know how that happens. I've been in situations like this where that was the last thing to develop, but we finished our first full week this week. Monday through Friday, we have a little get together about a book. Somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes. We went long on one day this week when we talked about Spider-Man in the movies. No problem with that if we do. We certainly don't have a hard and fast time when we cut things off. And it was very refreshing. I have a lot of outlets to talk about books. I have book reviews. I write at least one book review every day. I have unsigned venues, industry venues, where it's industry reviews of the type of advanced 300-word block that go out to libraries and schools, bookstores, that sort of thing, people who have to make their advanced buying judgments. But I also did longer reviews, both for commercial venues and also for my own venues, which is always nice, that have my name on them, that go on at greater length and are definitely written to entertain instead of just to inform. And I have those venues, and I really, really appreciate them. I am not in the position of so many freelance reviewers who don't have a widely known venue other than the ones they're pitching to. So you look ahead at November's books, and you see a book that you really, really want to review. Your choice would be either pitch it everywhere and hope that some editor takes it, or write a review of it on, usually it would be your blog, that will get 2 people to read it, if that. Even in the age of social media, where it's never been any easier to flog your stuff, that's the problem, is that everybody's flogging their stuff. I'm lucky enough not to be in that position. Open Letters Review there are a lot of people who read it, which is really nice. There are a lot of people in the industry who read it, which is very nice. And I also have Big Canoe News in northern Georgia, a print newspaper, a beautifully designed print newspaper. It is a beautiful thing to get on your doorstep. And I am their books editor. I'm not their arts editor. I don't run the occasional book review buried in the city section. They have a dedicated 2-page book section every month in the paper, and I'm the editor of that section. So that's another outlet. There are quite a few outlets that I have in addition to this channel. But nevertheless, doing, I think of it as a radio show, even though you can watch every episode. Jeff made the what I think is the very right decision to film all of these things rather than just put them up as audio on CPL's website. So you can go to the CPL YouTube channel and watch these things where they come up every day of every weekday. And we're still in early days, but I found in the course of this week that I was really starting to warm to the idea of, in addition to all those other venues, in addition to all those other ways also crafting some sort of a verbal presentation about a book. I don't know if it's the old school print newspaper dinosaur in me or not, but I simply cannot view that format as a review. But nevertheless, it might not have the linguistic virtuosity or complexity or nuance or whatever you want to call it. But I firmly believe that if you watch Book of the Day, at the end of that segment, you'll know whether or not you want to buy the book that we're talking about, whether or not you want to reserve it at the Cedarburg Public Library or your own library. It's not a full-dress book review. I don't quite know what it is. Book discussion, I guess, will work just fine. That's basically what they are. It's not the full-dress thing that I would think of for a print venue, but it isn't just a casual chat about a book either. There's assessing going on. In other words, the short answer is I very much liked my first week for CPL Radio. I very much liked the first week of Book of the Day, and I liked a lot of the books that I read this week. I wish this week, the last week in October, same as the last week in July or the first week in May or whatever. I wish there were more books that I loved, but I liked quite a few. And I thought, just for an upbeat, non-ranty video, that we would go through some of those. I don't know how many of these we've seen on this channel. I'm a little fuzzy on that at the moment, but these are recommendations that I read recently. Sorry, I'm being distracted because there's a little mouse across the floor in a block of sunlight, and I'm noticing him as he pokes his way in and out because she's not noticing him at the moment. And I don't know what to tell him. I can't talk to mice. I want to say to him what I say all the time, what I said whenever I traveled, anywhere that I've ever lived. I think you're adorable. Mice are extremely nice roommates. They barely make any mess at all. I want to say I have no problem with you at all, and I'm not going to alert her to your presence. I'm not going to snap a finger and point her in your direction, but I'm not going to save you from her either. You, right now, are 8 inches away from shelter underneath a bookcase. And she is 6 feet away from you. And if you think she can't get to you, cover that 6 feet faster than you can cover those 8 inches, you are very much mistaken. She can. And she's been entirely bred to do nothing else. It might look like her natural talent is to scream at other dogs on our walk and tell them to behave themselves. But that's only secondary. She's very good at that. She did that on her walk today. So unfortunately, all of the dog walkers in the neighborhood sort of get Frida. They know that she is screaming at their dog, but she's not aggressive at all. They can walk the dog right up to her, even though she's screaming her head off. She's only screaming to let the dog know who's boss. That's all. They're going to press noses together and sniff butts together and get along just fine. She's not going to be friendly with them. She doesn't play or anything like that. She thinks that dogs are dumb, needy losers who need to get a haircut and a job. But she's not aggressive. She's not going to do anything to them at all. And everybody in this neighborhood knows that. They just know that she likes to pop off. But I'll try not to get distracted by the little mouse. I don't want to. I have a feeling probably that he's over there because there might be tiny, infinitesimal sand speck crumbs on the floor. That might be that's the reason. He seems particularly interested in that area of the floor. So I don't want to shoo him away, but that could be drama. That's all. So let's go through a few books that I read either this week or I reread them this week, and have mostly positive things to say about them. First one being a big thing. I don't want to go tottering all over the apartment to find these things, but this is a big. I found a picture of it. That'll be good enough. This is a big thing that's quite nice. Probably it will be making its way to Olive, the book Olive. This is by Tim Lamon, and it's Bird Planet. Now you have Scarlet Ibises. This is a big picture book, a coffee table picture book of high definition, gorgeous bird photos. You get about 6 or 7 of these a year And this is first of all, this is the second one that I've seen this year instead of 6 or 7. And it's also just gorgeous. I don't think I'm going to see a better bird picture book this year. And there's one other bird book on this list. But this next one is not a bird book, and it's also the closest that I'm going to come. I'm doing it mainly just to exercise self-control. This is the closest I'm going to come to another rant, like the kinds that filled that earlier video. This is by Maggie Haberman, and it is Confidence Man. And it's the story of Donald Trump. It's yet another book of hers about Donald Trump. Maggie Haberman is a very, very talented writer. This is a very enjoyable reading experience. She's a very talented reporter with a lot of really good, deep sources into the Trump world, what we call Trump world. But I have diagnosed a common refrain, a common virology in Trump books, and I have yet to encounter a Trump book that's immune to it. And that is that in order to write a Trump book, you have to go down to Trump's level. There has to be an element of fleecing the public. There has to be an element of me over anything else in the world. That the essence of Trumpism is me over anything else in the world. I will cut anything else loose to save my own skin. And a smaller, weaker version of that has to apply in every Trump book. And it definitely applies in this one. Trump has, in this book, there's all kinds of really good dramatic scene setting, really readable stuff. The pages will fly by. But there are things, the pages are flying by and you're reading all of this drama, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, you knew this a year ago. You, Maggie Haberman, knew this a year ago. And you have a standing invitation to go on any cable news show in the world. Why didn't you tell anybody this a year ago? I don't know how much of a difference it would have made. It was the reason, the answer to that question is because I wanted to save it for my book. And we've seen that over and over again. From John Bolton to every other memoirist that exists, every single person, Bob Woodward, for Pete's sake, sat on incredibly incriminating details that it was the public's right to know. That is the problem with Trump books. It's the problem with this one as well. I won't say that it's a good Trump book, but it's certainly more enjoyable and less self-serving than most of them. This next one is, see, we got through that without a rant. That was just a discussion. That's all. CPL Radio is warming off on me. This next one is by Stephen Kershaw. It's ancient history. I thought it was very, very good. It's called The Harvest of War. And its thesis is that the great battles of ancient Greece, Thermopylae and Marathon, Salamis and whatnot, in some ways cemented or paved the way for participatory democracy. I think that thesis is a little bit tenuous, but I ended up not caring because the author is so good at writing ancient Greek history that I didn't mind. Some of the leaps in here I think don't land, but in terms of really readable history, I loved it. I strongly, strongly recommend it. This next one, also a pet subject of mine. Baby, speaking of pets, what are you doing? I talked about you a minute ago. I talked about you and how you terrorize the neighborhood. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. She's not looking out the window anymore. Oh, this could get ugly. The mouse has gone underneath the bookcase, but if he comes out again, he's going to be clearly in her field of view. He must surely know that. He must. You see, this is the bargain that I strike. I am not going to warn him. You run the risk. You know perfectly well there is not... The dog living in this apartment is not an old, white-faced, blind senior citizen. Instead, it's a sharp-eyed, sharp-reflexed young dog in the fullness of her strength. And not only that, the part you don't know is that she was bred for 5 centuries to kill you, specifically, not to kill some pig, some buffalo, and maybe a mouse now and then, but to kill mice specifically. We shall see. We shall see. But this next book is I didn't know that there was going to be this David Attenborough nature drama going on here. At least it's not ranting. This next book is also a pet subject of mine, The History of the Book. And this was fantastic. This is by Irene Vallejo, and it's called Papyrus, The Invention of Books in the Ancient World. And there you have, the reeds on the Nile, because this book goes way back. It goes back to before books were popularly disseminated. It goes back to when they were on papyrus, when they were hoarded commodities, when they were when rulers of cities shook down travelers to see what books they had to get. You have to donate your books to the library long enough for my team to copy them. Then you can get them back, or you can get the copies back. I love books like this, talking about the deep history of the book, the deep history of the very idea of a book. When was the first time that anyone thought that a book was something you carry around with you? When was the first, I won't say the first person, but the first era where it was even a conception that you might take a book to work, or might carry a book with you out on your errands? We take that completely for granted now. And we have for a long time. Your grandparents took that for granted. They carried a print book, a print and paper book. But we carry either a print and paper book or an incredible device with hundreds or thousands of books on it. But when was the first time that anybody thought that? When was the first time that someone making a weekly wage could have a book, or more than one book? And who was the first person to want to have a collection of such things? You dig into these early things. You find the authors like this one who are willing to unearth all kinds of sources and draw dots between them. I love it. I would love it anyway, but I don't mean that as a sort of a consolation recommendation. This was also a really good example. I've seen this exact same thing done very boringly, and this was not. Papyrus was actually really good. Ironically enough, I think it's a book that I only have as an ebook. And ironically enough, I liked it enough so that I might like it as a print and ink book. I have no idea how the twists and turns go here. Baby, will you stop it, little girl? Will you stop it? The next one is by Matt Simon. The Papyrus is really fun. If you're a bookish person, you're going to want to read about the earliest possible DNA of the thing you love so much. This next one, not a pleasant read at all. An important one, but not a pleasant one. And one that, as horrifyingly widely comprehensive as it is, I don't think covers the ground enough. In every chapter, I kept thinking, okay, but you're taking the most conservative estimates, or you're not looking at this, that, or the other thing. It's by Matt Simon, and it's called A Poison Like No Other: How Microplastics Corrupted Our Planet and Our Bodies. And the our bodies part is the part of this book that will really disturb you, knowing how many microplastics are these tiny little nodules of plastic. You almost can't see them, and a lot of times you can't see them. They are what plastics often break down into. They don't. So you think about like an empty liter bottle of soda, and you think, well, when it falls apart, it'll just be these little fragments, and I'll be able to see them all. I'll be able to see them all floating in the garbage, floating in the water. I could conceivably piece the whole package back together, but that's not the case. Those pieces break down and feed off gigantic sandstorms of tiny particles of microplastics. And they are everywhere, literally everywhere, including all over the food you eat, all through it, all through the water you drink, all through your water supply. They're everywhere. They're even in the air. And they're, as a consequence, entirely throughout your body. This taught me a lot, this book, and Matt Simon is a very passionate writer. So again, this wasn't boring at all. It's just the mother of all depressing subjects. We always think, I'm good at recycling. My surly houseboy, for instance, informed me just the other day that this household has almost no conventional garbage at all. Almost all of it is recycling. This book takes a lot of the feel-good nature out of claims like that by showing you that even recycling sometimes, in some ways, even makes it worse, and doesn't, in any case, make it appreciably better. It's It's an eye-opening book. An eye-opening book. I always think about, when I read books like this, I always think, which one is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair? Which one is Silent Spring by Rachel Carson? Which one is the alarm bell that we'll look back on and say was seminal? Which one of these things will it be? Poison Like No Other, I've never read a book on the subject that covered it as widely. I don't know if it will ever achieve that status. I haven't seen it reviewed anywhere, but it was tremendously good. Speaking of tremendously good, this next one was tremendously good. I had no doubt that it would be, which is a rare luxury for me when an author's credit in the Bank of Steve is so incredibly high that I know I'm going to like their next book, barring an act of God. That's a nice feeling. It really is. In that circumstance, pretty much all alone for new releases, I can turn off the critic and just read the book for pleasure, just purely for pleasure. And I did that with this one. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It's the new Stacy Schiff. It's The Revolutionary, her new biography of Samuel Adams. I've read every Samuel Adams biography, big and small, old and new, and I've read a lot of primary documents. I've handled some primary documents of the Boston Athenaeum, and I've read all sorts of monograph articles going back a century on this figure. The older cousin of John Adams, who was really fit for creating a revolution. He wasn't particularly fit for carrying it out, much less winning it. And he wasn't, as Stacy Schiff's, the saddest parts of her book, outlined that he wasn't really fit for living in its aftermath. He sort of found the exact right moment and the exact right cause in making the revolution happen. Adams, those of you who've read Stacy Schiff's books, her book on Cleopatra, for instance, you know already what she does with prose. It's amazing. She takes these static subjects and reworks them in her mind and writes them in such bracingly dramatic prose. Just incredibly readable, but totally new. And she does that with Samuel Adams. It served to remind me of something that all of that previous reading of mine maybe helps me to forget, which is how comparatively little we know, how comparatively lesser that documentary evidence is for Samuel Adams as opposed to John Adams or Thomas Jefferson or even figures like, Boston figures like Paul Revere or John Hancock. Stacy Schiff does everything that can be done with all of that material and is affectionate as well. Samuel Adams is one of those figures that you can study as a biographer who you are guaranteed you're going to like at the end of the procedure. They're not going to wear on you. You're not going to end up throwing bricks at their tomb. And she does. She ends up liking Samuel Adams, which is why she is gentle, almost to the point of drawing a curtain over his final years. There's a good deal of information about his final years, and unlike everything else that she does in the book, from the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, committees of correspondence, unlike all of that, at the end of his life, I could see her choosing not to use some sources, just to draw a polite curtain of silence over Samuel Adams' life on Winter Street, as he grew less and less like himself, further and further divorced from the meaning of his life. Stacy Schiff doesn't say it, but one commentator at the time, when Samuel Adams died in the early 1800s, one commentator pointed out that he was honored and beloved of the people of Boston, and that he didn't die a minute too soon. That element, that final act, is largely not mined in this book, but the rest of it, I'm not saying that it should be. It's not instructive to anybody at all, but the rest of it is fantastically well handled. I ordinarily, go on and on about how the autumn and winter is the big book season in America, and that a staple of that book season is founding father biographies. Samuel Adams is one of the quintessential unknown founding fathers. People really don't know how crucial he was to the Revolution, despite the fact that there have been quite a few biographies. People still know him best as a beer. And I don't know how many great founding father biographies we're going to get this year, but this one definitely counts. Then this next one is the Other Bird book that I think we've seen on this channel before. This is Joan Strassman. I finally read this thing. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It's Slow Birding, the art and science of enjoying the birds in your own backyard. The title coming from the author's conception that fast birding would be you loading your life list into a backpack with a pair of binoculars and a guidebook and tramping out into the wilderness, sometimes all day, sometimes in absolute physical misery, in search of a hard-to-find thing, with using apps and Facebook groups and whatnot to act on tips as to where these things might be in the exact moment of their migration. This book is completely different from that. This is something, the kind of bird watching that you could do with a cup of cocoa in your back porch, your enclosed back porch, just looking at a patch of ground or a yard or some trees or even a bird feeder and noticing what's there. I firmly believe that what the author also believes, which is that slow birding is the kind of birding that's most done in the world. Fast birders, if you want to call them that, the ground tramping kind, they have not all of their feathers are well pinioned. they are slight screw loose, a lot of them. They're loud and they're very clannish, very cultish. They get a lot of attention. But I think a lot of people do this kind of birding. I myself do. I think a lot of other people that I've known do. They would never, I've known so many people, hundreds of them, who would never in a million years tramp out into a marsh at dawn for any reason. You could tell them that some rare bird was out there. You could tell them some rare bird was out there handing out gold. They still wouldn't go. But those same people will stand rapt with attention looking at their backyard or down their garden. So, and I was hoping that this book would strike that kind of popular tone, and it does. It just does. This is the most charming bird book this year, as far as I'm concerned. Again, probably making its way to all of them. Next one is a biography. I was expecting the worst, even though the biographer has excellent credit in the Bank of Steve. I was expecting the worst, mainly because of John Meacham's new biography of Abraham Lincoln, which is almost entirely schmaltz from beginning to end. I was expecting a lot of that, especially with subjects that evoke schmaltz. And this one does, but I was wrong. This is John Farrell's biography of Ted Kennedy, the Kennedy brother who did not get assassinated, instead spent 50 years in the Senate. And it's incredible. The selling point, the point that the author is flogging on Lawrence O'Donnell or whatever other news organizations might profile him, is that he had access to Ted Kennedy's diaries, and that previous biographers had only heard rumors of these things, certainly hadn't had the unimpeded access that he had. And that is valuable, of course. It's valuable. This is a really, really good biographer, a terrific writer. It's valuable that he worked that into a book about Ted Kennedy. That certainly sets this one apart, makes it the Ted Kennedy book to read. But for me, the thing that really did this was the author's writing. This is a really good biographer, but this is the most heartfelt, almost openly emotional biography that by this author that I've ever read. I don't want to say inaccurate, right? This is an author who would rather cut off a digit than commit a willful inaccuracy. I'm not talking about accuracy and inaccuracy when I say that this is the most honest biography that I've read all year. It really surprised me over and over again. It did. There's an emotional register here. I don't know if it's just that Farrell and Kennedy, I don't know what the reason is, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I was expecting to patiently like it and work my way through it and note what was there and what wasn't, maybe note the extent to which those diaries were used. I was not expecting to love it the way that I did, and much less at several points in the book to be genuinely moved. So this was a surprise. 2022 hasn't had many surprises for me, but that was a surprise. This next one was also a bit of a surprise. It's a really, really good history, but I was surprised by its partisan nature, which you would think would be a negative. This is by George Weigel, and it is, I think we saw it on this channel, it's To Sanctify the World. It's his history of the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church. And I was expecting it to be thorough. I was expecting it to be up to date on all of the latest research, all of the best of the latest usage of all of the primary documents here. But I wasn't expecting it to be, this is going to sound really weird considering that it's a book about Vatican II. I wasn't expecting it to be so Catholic, with a capital C. This is, I don't know anything about the author, but this very much read as a history of Vatican II by an uncomplicatedly believing, practicing Catholic. As opposed to someone saying, look at what this funny religion is doing, let's examine it. I've read a couple of histories of Vatican II that sort of did that. This is every bit as scrupulous. It's every bit as careful with documentation, every bit as careful with laying out the sources and assessing who might be right and who might not be. But all of the papal encyclicals, all of the various pronouncements and writings, all of the theology of the major figures involved, everyone from Pope John Paul II to Pope Benedict XVI, all of that is handled with explicitly Catholic sensibilities in a marvelously intelligent and sensitive way. I say this is by far the most Catholic account of Vatican II that I've ever read. And ordinarily, judging from some of the openly Catholic stuff that I've read in the American book market in the past, that would be a criticism. I would be calling it that preparatory to condemning it. In this case, no, not at all. This book was reminding me of a thing that it's really awkward that I would ever forget, which is that it is possible to have a Catholic viewpoint on things and have that not be evil or debased or cynical or warped or small. I don't know that I'm probably not doing a good job of explaining what I mean. This is definitely not a history of the Second Vatican Council that is for Catholics only. Very much not. But at every point, the author assumes that this was an important event and that it was about important things. That might seem self-evident when you're talking about a historical event, but it hasn't been the case with Second Vatican Council. So I don't know who to recommend this to, but I loved it. I loved it. I wrote a review of a few of these things. I may remember to leave links down below to reviews, but this is mainly just books of the week. It's mainly just a sort of an overview of the week, in addition to all of the other stuff that I read, and in addition to all the stuff that I talked about on CPL Radio, and in addition to all the stuff that I reviewed. And I'm not talking here about rereads. My tally of about 30 books for the week does not include rereads. These are just some highlights and or lowlights. Maybe I'll do this every week, give a chance to just get more books talked about in front of you. But we'll finish on another Steve book. We have the Kennedys, we have Birds, we have Vatican II, and we'll finish up with another Steve subject that I loved, another book that I loved. And this is by J.W. Ocker, and it is The United States of Cryptids. Look at that cover. This is where the author just goes through the United States, cryptid by cryptid, talking about all the famous ones, a lot of the obscure ones, talking about the history of their folklore, where it originated, best guesses as to what the cryptid is, any kind of interesting details like that. I have read a number of this kind of book. This one is just a prime example, just a wonderful, wonderful example. Those of you maybe don't have any idea what I'm talking about. Cryptids are non-scientific animals. They are animals, species, types of animals that have a long history of anecdotal evidence, but don't exist as far as science is concerned. No reliable evidence, no genetics, certainly, no nothing like that. The most famous cryptids, of course, are Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, but there are lots of others. Every location has some. Some are obviously false. Some of the ones covered in this book are obviously false. Thunderbirds, for instance. Birds with 50-foot wingspans obviously do not exist in the world. Plain and simple. You can't hide something like that. It doesn't know to hide. the biosphere of current America could not sustain such a thing. There's no chance that such a thing exists. But lots of others, indigenous weird cats, bipedal creatures that walk around in the forest, not necessarily Bigfoot, maybe smaller than that. Things where you can look at some of these things, a lot of these things in the United States of Cryptid. This book will have you guessing. It'll have you making formulas and hypotheses of your own. But a lot of these regional cryptids, you can look at them, at the evidence, and say, okay, well, what could that be? Is it maybe a really big wild hog? Is there perhaps a breeding population of black panthers? Somehow? Even a very small breeding population of black panthers? Are these feral dogs? Something like that. Things like that happen. A feral dog crosses a road, or maybe 10 of them do, late at night in a place that has no wolves or coyotes. All of a sudden, folklore starts to accumulate around that. They get bigger. They get more glowing eyes. They get all sorts of things they didn't originally have. This is just wonderfully done along those lines of just, it doesn't expect you to be a believer. It's just taking you on a road trip of the cryptids of the country. Delightful. So we'll end with a delightful note. Sorry this video went long, but at least it was full of books and not bile. So those are some books. I think pretty much all of these are October books. I've been catching up on October in order to finish out the month strong. But I'm gonna wrap this up. This has gone on way too long for me. I'll be back though. Thank you, BookTube.